The blizzard screamed like a demon through the ravine, and Mei Lin knew if she didn't find him in the next hour, Gideon Hale would die alone in the snow. Her hands were already numb, her breath freezing in her lungs, but she pushed deeper into the white hell that had swallowed her husband. 6 months ago, she'd been a stranger stepping off a wagon into his cold mountain world, a mail-order bride married to a scarred trapper who'd needed a wife like he needed another rifle. Practical, necessary, loveless. Now she was risking everything to save him. Welcome to a story of survival, secrets, and a love forged in the unforgiving wilderness of the American frontier. If you enjoy this tale, please like this video and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The town of Iron Ridge wasn't much to look at, a handful of weathered buildings clinging to the base of the Montana mountains like barnacles on a ship's hull. It was the kind of place where winter came early and stayed late, where men spoke in grunts and nods, and where strangers were viewed with the same suspicion as rattlesnakes in a bedroll. Gideon Hale hadn't been down from his mountain cabin in 3 months when he walked into the Iron Ridge General Store that October morning. The few people inside went quiet, the way they always did when the mountain man appeared. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway and hands scarred from years of working traplines in country that killed weaker men. A jagged scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, a memento from Shiloh that he never talked about. "Gideon," Samuel Morrison, the store owner, nodded carefully. "Didn't expect to see you before first snow. Need to send a letter." Gideon's voice was rough from disuse, like stones grinding together. Morrison's eyebrows lifted slightly. In 15 years, he'd never known Gideon Hale to send correspondence to anyone. The mountain man kept to himself, traded his furs twice a year, and disappeared back into the high country where most folks figured he preferred the company of pine trees to people. "Letter." Morrison pulled out paper in an envelope. "Where to?" "San Francisco. There's an agency that handles arrangements." The word hung in the air like gun smoke. Morrison's wife, Martha, who'd been pretending to organize canned goods on a nearby shelf, abandoned all pretense of subtlety and stared openly. "What kind of arrangements?" Morrison asked carefully. Gideon's jaw tightened. He wasn't a man accustomed to explaining himself, and the attention made his skin crawl. But necessity had brought him down from the mountain, and pride wouldn't change facts. "I need a wife." The statement landed like a thunderclap. Martha Morrison's hand flew to her mouth. A young cowboy near the door actually turned around to verify he'd heard correctly. "A wife," Morrison repeated slowly, as if testing the words for hidden meaning. "Winter's getting harder. Cabin needs tending. Practical arrangement." Gideon pulled out a small leather pouch, counted out coins onto the counter. No romance, no lies, just honest work in exchange for food and shelter. Morrison slid the paper across the counter, his expression carefully neutral. "You want me to help you write it?" "I can write my own words." Gideon took the paper to the corner of the store, bent over it with the stub of a pencil, and wrote in careful, blocky letters. The message was blunt. "Mountain trapper, 43, seeks wife for practical arrangement. Cabin in Montana Territory, 4 miles above Iron Ridge. Winters are hard. Work is harder. I offer food, shelter, protection, and honesty. No false promises. No gentle life. If you can endure mountains in solitude, respond to G. Hale, Iron Ridge, Montana Territory." He sealed it, paid Morrison, and walked out without another word, leaving the entire store buzzing with speculation about what kind of woman would answer such a proposal. The truth was, Gideon didn't expect any response at all. But 3 months later, as the first serious snow began to fall, he received a letter written in careful, elegant script. "Mr. Hale, I accept your proposal. I have no illusions about gentle life or false promises. I need escape from a past that has destroyed my reputation and closed every door. I can work hard. I will not complain. I will arrive on the November 15th stage. Mei Lin." Gideon read the letter 3 times, standing in Morrison's store while snow collected on his shoulders. The name was Chinese. That would complicate things in a town where most folks viewed anyone different with automatic suspicion. But he'd offered honest terms, and she'd accepted them. A deal was a deal. "You sure about this?" Morrison asked quietly. A Chinese woman, up on that mountain, all winter. I'm sure. Gideon folded the letter and tucked it inside his coat. Stage comes November 15th, if the weather holds. It didn't hold. November 15th dawned gray and bitter, with wind that cut through wool like it was cotton gauze. Gideon rode down anyway, leading a second horse loaded with supplies. When the stage finally rolled in 2 hours late, half the town had gathered, not out of welcome, but out of morbid curiosity to see what kind of woman would marry the mountain hermit. The stage door opened and Mei Lin stepped down into the Montana cold. She was beautiful. That was the first shock that rippled through the crowd. Not pretty in the soft, delicate way that frontier men usually describe Chinese women in their limited experience, but genuinely beautiful. With high cheekbones, dark eyes that missed nothing, and black hair pulled back in a simple knot. She wore a dark blue traveling dress that had seen better days, and she carried a single worn carpet bag. The second shock was her composure. She didn't shrink from the staring faces or the whispered comments that were barely concealed. She simply stood there, scanning the crowd with an expression that revealed nothing. Gideon stepped forward. Mei Lin. She turned those dark eyes on him, taking in his height, his scars, his rough clothing and weather-beaten face. If she was disappointed, it didn't show. Mr. Hale. Just Gideon. He nodded toward the horses. It's a 4-mile ride, steep trail. You ride? I'll learn. It wasn't what he expected. Most women would have asked questions, sought reassurance, maybe even reconsidered the whole arrangement upon seeing the reality of what they'd agreed to. Mei Lin simply picked up her bag and waited. Well now, a voice drawled from the crowd. Looks like old Gideon ordered himself a China doll. The speaker was Chet Dawson, a loudmouth ranch hand with more whiskey than sense in his belly most days. Several men laughed. Mei Lin's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, recognition of a kind of cruelty she'd clearly encountered before. Gideon turned slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Say another word about my wife, Dawson, and you'll be picking your teeth out of the snow. The laughter died. Dawson's smirk faltered. Gideon might be a hermit, but everyone in Iron Ridge knew he'd been a soldier once, and the kind of silence he carried wasn't the peaceful kind. Didn't mean nothing by it, Dawson muttered. Gideon didn't acknowledge the half-apology. He simply helped Mei Lin onto the second horse, secured her bag, and mounted his own animal. Without another word to anyone, he turned both horses toward the mountain trail and led his new wife away from town. They rode in silence for the first mile. The trail climbed steeply, winding through pine forests where the snow lay thick and undisturbed. Mei Lin handled the horse awkwardly but without complaint, adjusting her seat when the animal stumbled, gripping the reins with determination rather than grace. You ever been on a mountain before? Gideon asked finally. No. It's different than city life. Everything is different than city life, Mr. Hale. Gideon, he corrected again. She was quiet for a moment. Gideon. His name sounded strange in her accent, the syllables shaped differently than he was used to, but not unpleasant. You understand what you agreed to? He asked. You were clear in your letter: food, shelter, honesty, hard work, no false promises. And that's enough for you? Mei Lin looked at him directly. My alternatives were worse. He nodded slowly. Whatever had driven her to accept a stranger's blunt proposal for marriage to a mountain hermit must have been dark indeed. But he'd offered honesty, so he gave it. Life up here is hard. Winter lasts 6 months. We'll be snowed in by December, won't see town again until April. Food has to be hunted, trapped, or what we store now. Water freezes, wood has to be cut daily. It's not a gentle existence. I didn't come seeking gentleness. What did you come seeking? The question hung between them as the horses climbed higher. Finally, Mei Lin spoke. Distance. From lies. From men who believe a woman's reputation can be destroyed with whispers, and her life ruined with false accusations. Her voice was steady, but something cold edged the words. You offered honesty. That alone made you different from everyone else. Gideon absorbed this. Someone destroyed your reputation. A powerful man who wanted what I wouldn't give. When I refused, he made sure no respectable house would hire me, no respectable family would speak to me. In his version of events, I was the seducer, the liar, the woman who tried to trap him. She paused. Your letter asked for someone who could endure mountains and solitude. That was easy to answer. I've already endured worse. They rode in silence after that, but Gideon found himself reassessing the woman behind him. He'd expected someone desperate, broken, perhaps running from poverty or scandal. Instead, he heard steel underneath her quiet words. Not brittleness, but genuine strength that had been tested and hadn't shattered. The cabin appeared as the sun began to set, a solid structure built into the mountainside with a stone chimney and walls made from logs Gideon had felled and fitted himself. It wasn't large. One main room with a sleeping loft, a root cellar dug into the hillside, and a lean-to stable for the horses. Smoke curled from the chimney where he'd banked the morning fire before leaving. Gideon dismounted and helped Mei Lin down. Her legs nearly buckled after hours in the saddle, but she caught herself on the horse's flank and steadied. "Stable the horses first," he said, "then I'll show you inside." She followed him to the lean-to, watching as he unsaddled both animals with efficient movements. When he handed her a brush and nodded toward her horse, she took it without hesitation and began working on the animal's sweat-dampened coat. Her strokes were awkward, unpracticed, but thorough. "You've never cared for a horse before," he observed. "I've never done many things I'll need to do here, but I learn quickly." When the horses were fed and watered, Gideon led her to the cabin door. He paused with his hand on the latch. "It's not much, but it's solid, warm, safe." Mei Lin looked up at him. "I don't need much." The interior was exactly what she'd expected. Rough-hewn furniture, a large fireplace, shelves lined with supplies, furs hanging on pegs, rifles mounted on the wall, and the basic necessities of frontier survival. But it was meticulously organized, everything in its place, and genuinely clean in a way that surprised her. "Sleeping loft is up there." Gideon nodded toward a ladder leading to a small upper level. "I'll sleep down here by the fire. You'll have privacy." Mei Lin set her carpet bag down and turned to face him directly. "We're married. On paper. You could have specified that in your letter. You didn't." Gideon's jaw tightened. "I'm not interested in forcing anything on an unwilling woman. You're here because we made a practical arrangement, not because I expect—" He paused, clearly uncomfortable. "You'll have privacy. When and if you decide otherwise, it'll be your choice." Something shifted in Mei Lin's expression, a slight softening around her eyes. "That's more than most men would offer." "I'm not most men." "No," she agreed quietly. "You're not." The first days established their pattern. Gideon woke before dawn, built up the fire, and began his daily work, checking trap lines, cutting wood, hunting, maintaining the cabin against the encroaching winter. Mei Lin watched everything with sharp attention, asking questions when he worked near the cabin, attempting tasks herself when he left. She'd never baked bread over an open fire, never hauled water that had to be melted from ice, never dressed a rabbit or plucked a grouse. Her hands, accustomed to delicate needlework, blistered and cracked in the cold. But she persisted with a determination that reminded Gideon of soldiers he'd known, the ones who survived not because they were strongest, but because they absolutely refused to quit. "You're doing it wrong," he said one morning, watching her struggle with the bread dough. Mei Lin's hand stilled. "Then show me the right way." He moved closer, demonstrating how to work the dough, his scarred hands dwarfing hers as he shaped the mass with practiced efficiency. "Like this, firm but not aggressive. Let the dough tell you when it's ready." She tried again, mimicking his movements. It still wasn't perfect, but it was better. "Your hands are bleeding," he observed. She glanced at her cracked knuckles without much interest. "They'll heal. There's salve in the box by the door. Use it at night." "I'm fine." "Use it anyway. Infected cuts up here can turn serious." It was the closest he'd come to expressing concern, and Mei Lin recognized it for what it was. That night, she used the salve. 2 weeks into their arrangement, the first serious storm hit. Gideon had been expecting it, reading the signs in the sky and the behavior of the animals. He spent the previous day securing everything, bringing in extra wood, checking the chimney, and reinforcing the shutters. When the blizzard descended, it hit with the fury that only mountain storms could achieve. Wind screamed around the cabin, snow piled against the walls, and the temperature dropped so severely that frost formed on the inside of the shutters despite the roaring fire. That night, even with the fire blazing, The cabin grew dangerously cold. Gideon had moved his bedroll closer to the hearth, but he could see Mei Lin shivering in the loft despite the pile of furs he'd given her. "Come down here," he called up. "I'm fine." "You're freezing. Heat rises, but not enough in this cold. Down here by the fire is warmer." After a long moment, Mei Lin climbed down the ladder, wrapped in furs, her face pale with cold. Gideon had arranged his bedroll and pulled out extra blankets, creating a nest of warmth near the fire. "We'll need to share heat," he said bluntly. "It's survival, nothing more." She nodded, understanding the practicality. They lay down back to back, separated by layers of fur and wool, both rigid with awareness of the other. But as the night deepened and the storm intensified, necessity overrode propriety. They shifted closer, sharing warmth, until Mei Lin's back pressed against Gideon's chest and his arm, heavy with muscle and scars, draped protectively over her. Neither spoke. But something changed in that forced intimacy. Gideon felt the steady rhythm of Mei Lin's breathing, the surprising strength in her small frame, the way she didn't flinch from his touch, but seemed to accept it as naturally as she accepted everything else about their strange arrangement. For Mei Lin, feeling the solid weight of him behind her, the warmth and unexpected security of being held, even out of necessity, awakened something she thought had died in San Francisco. Not desire exactly, but a recognition that maybe safety could exist. Maybe trust was possible. When morning came, they separated without acknowledgement, going about their tasks as if nothing had changed. But Gideon found himself watching her more carefully, noticing small details, how she hummed softly while working, how she'd begun organizing the cabin in subtle ways that made it more efficient, how she never complained even when tasks clearly exhausted her. And Mei Lin found herself studying him when he didn't know she was looking. The careful way he handled tools, the quiet competence in everything he did, the moments when his expression softened while watching the mountains through the window. 3 weeks after her arrival, Gideon returned from checking his trapline to find Mei Lin kneeling by the fireplace, tears streaming silently down her face while she worked on repairing one of his shirts. He froze in the doorway, uncertain. "You hurt?" She shook her head, wiping quickly at her eyes. "Then what's wrong?" For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, still staring at the shirt in her hands, she spoke. "In San Francisco, after the accusations, I became invisible. People I'd known for years looked through me as if I didn't exist. I had no value, no purpose, no place. I was just nothing." She finally looked up at him. "Here, I have purpose. I contribute. The bread I bake feeds us both. The water I carry sustains us. Even mending your shirt matters. I exist here in a way I didn't exist there." Gideon stood very still, absorbing this. Then he crossed the room and sat down across from her. "You were never nothing," he said gruffly. "That man who spread lies, those people who believed him without questioning, they're the worthless ones, not you. You don't know what he said I did. Don't need to. I know lies when I hear them, and I know strength when I see it. You're stronger than most men I knew in the war, and you've got more integrity than the whole town of Iron Ridge combined." Mei Lin's hand stilled on the shirt. "You really believe that?" "I don't say things I don't mean." Something passed between them in that moment. An understanding, a recognition, a shift in the foundation of their arrangement. They were no longer just two people surviving together. They were becoming partners. The next day, Gideon began teaching her to read the mountains the way he did. How to predict weather from the clouds, how to track animals by their signs, how to identify plants that could heal and plants that could kill. Mei Lin absorbed everything with fierce concentration, asking questions that showed she understood not just the what, but the why. "Why do you love it up here?" she asked one afternoon as they walked the trapline together. "Most people would find this isolation unbearable." Gideon was quiet for a long time, carefully checking a trap that held nothing but snow. Finally, he spoke. "War taught me that people are capable of terrible things. Saw men do things to each other that—" He shook his head. "After it ended, I couldn't go back to towns, cities, people pretending everything was normal. The mountains don't lie. They don't betray. They're hard, but they're honest. I can trust that." "And now?" Mei Lin asked softly. "Do you still trust only mountains?" He looked at her directly. "I'm learning." That night, Mei Lin chose to stay by the fire again, even though the storm had passed and the loft was warmer. Gideon didn't comment, just made space for her in the nest of furs. When they lay down, Mei Lin turned to face him instead of away. "Tell me about the scar," she said. "It's not a pleasant story. Neither is mine, but you've never asked me to tell it." "Fair point." Gideon settled back against the furs. Shiloh. Second day of battle. Artillery shell hit close enough to spray shrapnel. Piece of it carved through my face, nearly took my eye. Field surgeon stitched me up with whatever he had handy, which wasn't much. "You were lucky to survive." "That's what they told me." "Didn't feel lucky. 20,000 men died there, and I kept wondering why I got to live when better men didn't." Mei Lin reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away. When he didn't, she traced the scar with her fingertips, following the jagged path from temple to jaw. "My face has scars too," she said quietly. "You just can't see them." "Tell me." So she did. The story came out haltingly at first, then gaining strength as Gideon listened without judgment, without interruption. She told him about Jin Zhao, the wealthy merchant who'd wanted her as a mistress. When she'd refused, he'd spread rumors that she'd tried to trap him into marriage, that she'd stolen from his household, that she'd engaged in improper relations with multiple men. None of it was true, but truth didn't matter. Jin Zhao had power, connections, money. Mei Lin had only her word, and a Chinese woman's word counted for little in San Francisco society. "I fought at first," she said, "tried to defend myself, to prove the lies wrong, but every defense just made me look more guilty. Eventually, I realized the truth didn't matter to anyone who mattered, so I stopped fighting and started planning escape." "That's when you found my letter." "Yes. Your bluntness was refreshing. No pretty lies, no false promises, just honest terms for an honest arrangement." She paused. "I didn't expect kindness. I didn't expect respect. I certainly didn't expect this." "This?" She gestured at the space between them. "Partnership, feeling valued, being treated as if my thoughts and efforts matter." Gideon's hand covered hers where it rested on his scar. "They do matter. You matter." The fire crackled in the silence. Outside, wind whispered through the pines. Inside, two people who'd started as strangers in a practical arrangement discovered they were building something neither had expected, something that felt dangerously close to trust, maybe even to care. "Gideon?" Mei Lin's voice was soft. "Yeah? I'm glad it was your letter," I answered. His scarred hand tightened on hers. "So am I." They fell asleep that way, hands linked, the distance between them no longer measured in feet, but in walls slowly crumbling. December arrived with deeper cold and heavier snows. The cabin became their entire world, the mountain their fortress against the hostile winter. But inside those log walls, a different kind of warmth was building, one that had nothing to do with fire and everything to do with two damaged people learning to trust again. Mei Lin's skills grew daily. Her bread no longer came out flat and hard. Her rabbit stew actually tasted good. She could split kindling without endangering her fingers and haul water without spilling half of it. More importantly, she'd begun to understand the rhythms of mountain life, anticipating needs before they arose, working alongside Gideon with increasing efficiency. Gideon, for his part, found himself talking more than he had in years. Mei Lin had a way of asking questions that made him want to answer, sharing observations that made him see familiar surroundings with fresh eyes. She made him laugh, actual laughter, rough from disuse, when she told stories about her attempts to master frontier skills, or when she pointed out absurdities in situations with dry humor. He appreciated. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Mei Lin pulled out a small wooden box from her carpet bag. "I want to show you something." Inside were spools of silk thread in brilliant colors, a few precious needles, and scraps of fine fabric. She selected a piece of red silk and began stitching with movements so graceful and precise they mesmerized Gideon. "What are you making?" "A gift. For you." Over the next few evenings, the project took shape. A beautiful handkerchief embroidered with mountain peaks, pine trees, and a small cabin. The detail was extraordinary, each stitch perfect, the image capturing the essence of their world. When she finished and handed it to him, Gideon held it carefully, as if it might dissolve. I've never owned anything this fine. Then it's time you did. He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not just the beautiful woman who'd stepped off the stage 3 months ago, but the partner who'd transformed his cabin into a home, the strength that matched his own, the person who made isolation feel less like exile and more like choice. Mei Lin, whatever he'd been about to say was interrupted by a sharp crack outside, followed by the angry bellow of a bear. Gideon was on his feet instantly, grabbing his rifle. "Stay inside. Bar the door behind me." "What is it?" "Bear. Too close to the cabin. Must have smelled our food stores." He was out the door before she could respond. Mei Lin barred it as instructed, then climbed to the loft window where she could see out. In the moonlight reflecting off snow, she could make out Gideon's dark form and the massive shadow of the bear near the lean-to where they kept dried meat. The confrontation was brief but tense. Gideon fired a warning shot over the bear's head. The animal reared up, massive and furious. Gideon stood his ground, rifle ready, his voice carrying clear and commanding across the snow. "Get on! This isn't your territory!" For a long moment, man and bear faced each other. Then, with a final roar of protest, the bear dropped to all fours and lumbered off into the trees. When Gideon came back inside, Mei Lin was waiting with the bar lifted. "You could have been killed." "Could have been. Wasn't." He set the rifle down and checked the door's security. Bears know humans mean trouble. Usually, one shot is enough to send them looking for easier food. Usually? Nothing's guaranteed on a mountain. Mei Lin studied his face, calm, unbothered, as if confronting bears was just another task like splitting wood or checking traps. This was the reality of the life he'd offered her. Danger, hardship, isolation. Yet watching him handle the threat with quiet competence, she realized she felt safer here with him than she'd ever felt in the supposed civilization of San Francisco. "Teach me to shoot," she said. Gideon raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because the next time a bear comes, or the next time any threat appears, I want to be able to defend myself, defend us." He considered this, then nodded. "Tomorrow, if the weather holds." The next day dawned clear and cold. After morning chores, Gideon took her outside with his smaller rifle and set up targets against a snowbank. First rule: never point a weapon at anything you're not willing to destroy. Second rule: respect the gun's power. Third rule: steady breath, steady hands, steady aim. He showed her how to hold the rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to control her breathing. When she fired her first shot, the recoil surprised her and the bullet went wide. But Mei Lin was nothing if not determined. She tried again, and again. By the end of the afternoon, she could hit the target more often than not. "You're a quick study," Gideon said with something that might have been pride. "I had a good teacher." Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Recognition, appreciation, something deeper that neither was quite ready to name. That night, when they lay down by the fire, Mei Lin didn't leave space between them. She settled against Gideon's side as naturally as if they'd been doing it for years. His arm came around her just as naturally, pulling her close. "This arrangement," Mei Lin said softly into the darkness, "it's changed. Yes, we should probably talk about that." Gideon was quiet for a moment. "I'm not good with words. Never have been. But I know this. Having you here, it's..." He struggled for the right phrase. "It's the best decision I ever made." Mei Lin tilted her head back to look at him. "Even though I can't ride well or shoot straight or bake proper biscuits?" "You ride better than you did. You're learning to shoot, and your biscuits are getting better." He paused. "But that's not why." "Then why?" "Because you're here. Because you stayed. Because when things get hard, you don't quit. Because you make this cabin feel like more than just shelter." His scarred hand came up to cup her face. "Because when I look at you, I don't see a practical arrangement anymore." "What do you see?" "Someone I don't want to lose." Mei Lin's hand covered his. "You won't. I'm not going anywhere." When he kissed her, it was careful, tentative, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. Instead, she leaned into him, answering his caution with her own careful exploration. The kiss was nothing like the passionate embraces in the romance novels Mei Lin had once read. It was better, real, honest, flavored with wood smoke and coffee, weighted with genuine feeling rather than empty flourish. When they finally pulled apart, Gideon rested his forehead against hers. I thought I was done with this, with feeling anything for anyone. So did I, Mei Lin whispered. But here we are. Here we are. They fell asleep wrapped together, the practical arrangement they'd started with transforming into something infinitely more precious. A partnership built on honesty, respect, and growing affection that neither had expected but both desperately needed. Outside, the mountain stood silent and eternal, keeping watch over two people who'd found in each other what they'd both thought was lost forever, the possibility of trust, the beginning of love, and the courage to hope again. The night settled around them, deep and cold and perfect, and inside the cabin, the fire burned warm. January brought a cold so severe that water froze solid in its bucket within minutes of being carried inside. The world beyond the cabin became a white wasteland where nothing moved except wind-driven snow and the occasional shadow of wildlife desperate enough to brave the brutal temperatures. Gideon and Mei Lin had fallen into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. They woke together by the fire, her small form nestled against his larger one, sharing warmth through the coldest hours before dawn. Morning chores were divided without discussion. He handled the outdoor work while she managed the cabin, though increasingly she insisted on accompanying him to learn every aspect of mountain survival. You don't need to come out in this, Gideon said one morning, as Mei Lin bundled herself in layers of fur and wool. I can handle the horses alone. I know you can. She wrapped a scarf around her face, leaving only her eyes visible. But if something happens to you, I need to know how to do everything myself. He paused in the doorway, studying her. That's a dark thought. It's a practical one. You taught me that. She had him there. Gideon nodded and held the door open. Together they pushed through knee-deep snow to the lean-to where the horses stamped and snorted in the frigid air. Working side by side, they fed and watered the animals, checked their hooves for ice buildup, and made sure the shelter remained secure against the wind. You ever think about getting more horses? Mei Lin asked, stroking the neck of her mare, an animal she'd named Yue, meaning moon, for the white blaze on its forehead. Thought about it. But more horses mean more feed, more work. Up here you only keep what you absolutely need. Makes sense. She moved to Gideon's gelding, a big bay he called Flint. Though I think Yue gets lonely sometimes. Gideon shot her an amused look. Horses don't get lonely. How do you know? Maybe she appreciates company the same way people do. People, he said dryly, are generally more trouble than they're worth. Mei Lin turned to face him fully, her eyes bright above the scarf. All people? He crossed the small space between them, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air. Present company excluded. I should hope so, considering you married me. Best decision I ever made, remember? I remember. She reached up to brush snow from his beard, a gesture that had become familiar over the past weeks. Though I'm still waiting for you to regret it. Not going to happen. You sound very certain. I am. His gloved hands framed her face gently. You've made this mountain feel less like exile and more like home. That's not something I take lightly. Before Mei Lin could respond, a sound cut through the wind, a sharp crack followed by a low rumble that made the ground tremble slightly beneath their feet. Gideon's head snapped toward the mountain ridge above them. Avalanche. Where? North face, sounds like. Far enough away we're safe, but... He frowned, listening intently. Someone might not be. Who would be up there in this weather? Trappers, miners, damn fools who don't know better. He was already moving toward the cabin. I need to check. Mei Lin followed. You're going out there in this cold? If someone's buried, they've got maybe an hour before they freeze or suffocate. Probably less. Inside, Gideon gathered supplies with practiced efficiency. Rope, a shovel, his rifle, dried meat, a flask of whiskey. Mei Lin watched, her mind racing. I'm coming with you. No. Gideon? No. He turned to face her, his expression set. If I don't make it back, you need to be here, safe. You know enough now to survive until spring if you're careful. The thought sent ice through her veins that had nothing to do with the temperature. Don't talk like that. It's practical. Same as you said, we prepare for possibilities. He pulled her close, kissed her forehead. I'll be back before dark. Keep the fire going. Then he was gone, disappearing into the white hell outside, leaving Mei Lin alone with her fear and the relentless wind. The hours crawled past like wounded animals. Mei Lin kept herself busy with tasks, baking bread, mending clothes, organizing supplies, but her mind remained fixed on Gideon somewhere out in that frozen wasteland. She climbed to the loft repeatedly, staring out at the wall of white, seeing nothing but snow and growing shadows as afternoon bled toward evening. When full dark fell and he still hadn't returned, real panic set in. She paced the cabin, arguing with herself. He'd told her to stay. He'd been explicit about it. But he'd also taught her to read the mountains, to track, to shoot. He'd made her a partner, not a helpless dependent. And partners didn't abandon each other. The decision crystallized with sudden clarity. Mei Lin began gathering supplies, the smaller rifle, rope, a knife, the warmest furs, a tin of matches wrapped in oilcloth. She left a large fire banked in the hearth and took a burning branch to light her way for the first stretch. Outside, the cold hit like a physical blow. The world had become nothing but darkness and snow, wind screaming through the pines with a sound like tortured spirits. Mei Lin forced herself forward, following the path Gideon had broken earlier, now half filled with new snow. She'd gone perhaps a mile when she heard it, a faint sound that might have been wind, but might have been something else. Mei Lin stopped, straining to hear over the storm. There it was again, more distinct, a voice, hoarse and weak. "Here, someone, please!" She pushed toward the sound, fighting through drifts that threatened to swallow her whole. The burning branch had long since blown out, leaving her in darkness broken only by the strange luminescence of snow reflecting starlight through brief breaks in the clouds. The voice came again, and this time she could make out a shape, a figure half buried in snow near an outcropping of rocks. "Hold on," Mei Lin called, struggling toward them. As she got closer, she could see it was a young man, maybe 20, his face blue with cold. Blood stained the snow near his leg. "Thank God," he gasped. "I thought, the avalanche, my legs pinned." Mei Lin dropped to her knees beside him, assessing the situation. A heavy branch, possibly brought down by the avalanche's wind, had him trapped. The leg looked broken, bent at an unnatural angle. "My husband came looking for survivors," she said, working to clear snow from around the branch. "Did you see him? Big man, scarred face. He found my partner, started helping him down the mountain. Told me he'd send help back, but..." The young man's teeth chattered violently. "That was hours ago. I didn't think anyone was coming." Relief and new worry flooded through Mei Lin simultaneously. Gideon was alive and helping someone else, which meant he might not return for hours yet. This man would freeze long before then. "What's your name?" Tom Bridger." "Tom, I'm going to free your leg. It's going to hurt." "Can't hurt worse than it already does." He was wrong. When Mei Lin finally managed to shift the branch enough to pull him free, Tom's scream echoed across the mountain. But he was free, and after a moment of gasping recovery, he nodded at her. "Can you stand with support?" she asked. "I can try." Getting Tom upright was a study in controlled agony. He leaned heavily on Mei Lin, who was shocked to discover she was strong enough to bear his weight. All those weeks of hauling water, splitting wood, and working alongside Gideon had built muscles she hadn't realized she possessed. "The cabin's about a mile that way," she said, pointing. "We're going to move slowly. If you need to rest, tell me." They made horrible progress. Tom could barely put weight on his broken leg, and the snow fought them with every step. Several times, Mei Lin thought they'd have to stop, that she couldn't go any further, that they'd both freeze before reaching safety. But each time, she thought of Gideon's words, "You're stronger than most men I knew in the war," and she found the strength to take another step, and another. The cabin appeared like a miracle through the snow, firelight glowing in the window. Mei Lin had never been so grateful to see anything in her life. She half carried, half dragged Tom the final yards and shouldered the door open. Inside, warmth enveloped them like a blessing. Mei Lin got Tom settled near the fire, then set about examining his leg with the basic medical knowledge Gideon had taught her. "It's definitely broken," she said. "I can set it and splint it, but I won't lie. This is going to be worse than getting you out from under that branch." Tom's laugh was shaky. "Just do it quick." Mei Lin gave him a folded leather strap to bite down on, then took a deep breath and pulled the legs straight. Tom's muffled scream made her wince, but she kept working, setting the bone as best she could and binding it tightly with splints made from firewood and strips of cloth. When she finished, Tom's face was pale and sweating despite the cold he'd just escaped. "You've done this before," he gasped. "No, but my husband taught me the basics. Said knowing how to set a bone might save a life one day." She pressed a cup of hot broth into his hands. "Drink this slowly." "Your husband, he's the mountain man? Gideon Hale?" "Yes. He saved my partner's life. Jacob couldn't walk at all after the avalanche hit. Gideon got him up and moving, probably carried him half the distance. Told us he had a wife waiting, but he'd get Jacob to safety first." Tom studied her with new respect. He wasn't exaggerating when he said you could handle yourself. Mei Lin felt warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "He said that?" Exact words were, "My wife's tougher than she looks. Woman survived San Francisco society, and 6 weeks on this mountain. She can handle just about anything." Tom managed a weak smile. Guess he was right. Hours later, when the door finally opened and Gideon stumbled inside, supporting another injured man, his eyes went immediately to Mei Lin. She saw relief flash across his face, followed quickly by something harder as he took in Tom by the fire and realized what she'd done. After getting Jacob settled, after checking both injured men were stable, after banking the fire and ensuring everyone had food and water, Gideon pulled Mei Lin aside to the far corner of the cabin. "I told you to stay here." His voice was low but intense. Mei Lin met his gaze steadily. "And if I had, Tom would be dead. You could have died going out in that storm. So could you. Yet you went anyway. That's different. Why? Because you're a man and I'm a woman?" She kept her voice level but firm. "You taught me to survive out there. You said I was strong. Did you mean it, or were those just words?" Gideon's jaw worked. "Of course I meant it." "Then trust me the way I trust you. Yes, it was dangerous. Yes, I could have died. But you taught me to read danger, to handle it. You made me a partner, Gideon. Partners don't stay behind when the other is in trouble." For a long moment they stood there, eyes locked in silent battle. Then, slowly, Gideon's expression shifted from anger to something else. Understanding, maybe even pride. "You set his leg," he said quietly. "You taught me how." "I taught you on a rabbit." "The principle's the same, just bigger bones." A muscle twitched in his jaw that might have been suppressed amusement. "Woman, you're going to turn my hair white. It's already white. From age. From worry, more like. Especially now that I'm married to someone as stubborn as I am." He pulled her close, his arms tight around her. "Don't ever scare me like that again." "Don't make promises you can't keep," she murmured against his chest. "Next time you're in danger, I'm coming after you. That's not negotiable." She felt him sigh, felt the tension drain from his body as he accepted what he'd known deep down already, that the woman he'd married for practical purposes had become someone he couldn't imagine losing, someone whose strength matched his own, someone who would fight for him the way he'd fight for her. "Fair enough," he said finally, "but next time we go together from the start. Deal." They stood there for a moment, wrapped in each other while the fire crackled and the injured men dozed and the storm continued its assault outside. Two stubborn people who'd found in each other exactly what they needed. Not someone to protect or be protected by, but an equal partner in surviving the beautiful, brutal wilderness they called home. The next 3 days were crowded and chaotic. Tom and Jacob needed constant care. Wounds cleaned, bandages changed, pain managed with the limited supplies available. Mei Lin moved between patients with calm efficiency while Gideon kept the cabin running, hunting fresh meat, maintaining the fire, ensuring their limited medical supplies didn't run out. On the 4th morning, the storm finally broke. Weak sunshine filtered through the clouds, turning the snow-covered world into a glittering expanse of white. Tom's leg was healing well enough to attempt travel with a crutch, and Jacob's shoulder, while still painful, had regained some mobility. "We need to get you both to Iron Ridge," Gideon said. "Town doctors should look at those injuries properly." "Soon as we can travel, we'll get out of your hair," Tom said. "You and your wife have done more than enough." "We'll all go," Gideon decided. "Need to restock supplies anyway, and Mei Lin's never seen town in winter." Mei Lin looked up from the bread she was kneading. Is that wise? The last time I was there, the reception wasn't exactly warm. Let them talk. You're my wife. That means you belong in Iron Ridge, same as anyone. There was steel in his voice that made it clear the subject wasn't up for debate. Mei Lin felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of anxiety she'd been carrying since first arriving in Montana. Having Gideon's unwavering support, his absolute certainty that she belonged, meant more than he probably realized. 2 days later, they made the journey down. Gideon and Mei Lin rode their horses while Tom and Jacob shared a travois pulled behind, cushioned with furs against the rough terrain. The trip took twice as long as normal, but they reached Iron Ridge by late afternoon. The town's reaction to their arrival was immediate and mixed. Some folks hurried over to help with the injured men, genuinely concerned. Others hung back whispering, their eyes fixed on Mei Lin with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Dr. Matthews took charge of Tom and Jacob immediately, ushering them into his office while firing questions about their treatment. When he heard that Mei Lin had set Tom's broken leg, he paused. "You set this?" "Yes," Mei Lin said simply. Matthews examined the leg thoroughly, his expression growing more impressed. "It's good work. Clean break, properly aligned. You probably saved his leg, maybe his life." "My husband taught me." "Then your husband's a good teacher." Matthews looked at Gideon with new respect. "Most people panic with injuries like this." She kept her head. "She always does," Gideon said, and the pride in his voice was unmistakable. Word spread quickly through town. The Chinese woman who'd married the mountain hermit had saved 2 men's lives during the blizzard. It didn't erase all suspicion, but it shifted something, made Mei Lin more than just a curiosity or scandal. She became a person who'd proven her worth in the currency frontier towns understood best: practical capability in the face of danger. At Morrison's general store, Martha Morrison actually smiled at Mei Lin. "Heard what you did for those boys? That was brave." "It was necessary," Mei Lin corrected gently. "Still brave." Martha began pulling items from Gideon's supply list. "How are you managing up on that mountain? Can't be easy, especially for someone not raised to it." "I'm learning." Gideon's patient. "Gideon Hale? Patient?" Martha laughed. "Never thought I'd hear those words together. You must be working miracles up there." "No miracles, just partnership." As Martha wrapped their supplies, she lowered her voice. "Not everyone in town's going to come around. Some folks, their minds are made up regardless of facts. But you've got friends here now, people who see you for who you are, not what gossips say. That's worth something." It was worth more than something. It was worth everything. Mei Lin blinked back unexpected tears. "Thank you." Their last stop was the saloon, where Gideon needed to collect payment for furs he'd traded before winter. Mei Lin waited outside, watching townspeople go about their business, when she heard a familiar voice. "Well, well, if it isn't the China doll." Chet Dawson slouched against the saloon wall, whiskey bottle in hand. His eyes traveled over Mei Lin with obvious intent. "Mr. Dawson," Mei Lin kept her voice neutral. "Heard you been playing nurse up on that mountain. Bet those fellas enjoyed that." "They enjoyed not dying. I imagine you'd appreciate the same if you were in their situation." Dawson pushed off the wall, moving closer. "You got a smart mouth. Bet old Gideon likes that about you." "What my husband likes or doesn't like is none of your concern." "See, that's where you're wrong." Dawson was close enough now that she could smell the whiskey. "Everyone in this town knows what you are, knows what you did back in San Francisco. Gideon might be fool enough to marry soiled goods, but that don't make you respectable." Mei Lin felt ice in her veins, but her voice stayed steady. "You don't know anything about me." "Know enough. No Jin Zhao put out word about you clear across the territory. Know exactly what kind of woman would—" He never finished the sentence. Gideon appeared behind Mei Lin like a thunderstorm made flesh, his hand clamping down on Dawson's shoulder, with enough force to make the man yelp. "Finish that sentence," Gideon said quietly, "and you'll be eating through a straw for a month." "I didn't mean nothing. You meant plenty, and here's what you're going to do. You're going to apologize to my wife, and then you're going to walk away and never speak to her again unless you've got something respectful to say." "Or what?" Dawson tried for bravado, but his voice shook. Gideon leaned in close. "Or I'll remind you why I survived Shiloh when 20,000 other men didn't. And trust me, Dawson, you don't want that reminder." The threat hung in the air, cold and absolute. Dawson swallowed hard, then mumbled something that might have been an apology before stumbling away. Gideon turned to Mei Lin, his eyes searching her face. "You all right?" "I'm fine. I can handle men like Dawson." "I know you can, but you shouldn't have to." He offered his arm. "Come on. Let's get our supplies and go home." Home. The word settled into Mei Lin's chest with perfect rightness. Not the cabin, not the mountain, wherever Gideon was, that was home. They loaded their supplies and began the journey back as the sun set, painting the snow in shades of rose and gold. Halfway up the mountain, Gideon pulled his horse to a stop. "What Dawson said about Jin Zhao putting out word." Mei Lin's hands tightened on her reins. I hoped the distance would outrun his reach. "Clearly it hasn't. That could be a problem." "I know. We'll deal with it if it comes to that. But Mei Lin," he turned to look at her directly. "Whatever he's saying, whatever lies he's spreading, they don't change anything. You're my wife. That's the only truth that matters to me." Something fierce and warm bloomed in Mei Lin's chest. "Even if fighting for me makes your life harder?" "Especially then." Gideon's scarred face was set with determination. "I've had an easy life exactly 0 days since I was born. I'm not afraid of hard, and I'm not afraid of standing up for what's mine. Yours?" He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "If you want to be. I know we started this as a practical arrangement, but it's become something else. At least for me." Mei Lin guided her horse closer until they were side by side. "For me too. Has been for a while now." "Yeah?" "Yeah." She reached across the space between their horses, took his hand. "You're stuck with me, Gideon Hale. Whatever comes, we face it together." His fingers tightened on hers. Together. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, hands linked, as the first stars began appearing in the darkening sky above the mountains that had become their sanctuary, their fortress, their home. February came with a false promise of spring. The temperature rose just enough to make the snow heavy and wet, clinging to everything it touched. Icicles hung from this cabin's eaves like crystal daggers, and the world dripped with the constant sound of melting ice that would freeze again come nightfall. Inside the cabin, Gideon and Mei Lin had settled into a closeness that felt both new and ancient, as if they'd always been meant to find each other in this harsh wilderness. Mornings began with quiet intimacy, waking tangled together in furs, sharing coffee and conversation, while dawn painted the mountains in shades of pink and gold. Days were spent working side by side, their movements synchronized from weeks of partnership. Nights brought a different kind of harmony, gentle explorations and shared warmth that transformed their marriage from arrangement to genuine union. But the peace was fragile, and both of them knew it. The first crack appeared on a gray morning when a rider appeared on the trail below the cabin. Gideon spotted him from the window, his body going still in a way that made Mei Lin look up from the leather she was mending. "What is it?" "Rider coming up, moving with purpose." He reached for his rifle, checked the load. "Stay inside until I know what this is about." Mei Lin set aside her work and moved to the window. The rider was well dressed for the territory, wearing a coat that looked expensive even from a distance. His horse was sleek and well fed, the kind of animal that belonged in cities, not mountain trails. Gideon stepped outside as the rider approached, his rifle held casually but ready. "That's far enough. State your business." The man reined in his horse, surveying Gideon with the kind of assessment city folk made of frontier men, half fascination, half disdain. He was perhaps 40, with a soft face and manicured hands that had never done a day's hard labor. "Mr. Gideon Hale?" "Who's asking?" "My name is Richard Thornton. I'm an attorney representing Mr. Jin Zhao of San Francisco." He pulled a document from his coat. "I'm here regarding a matter of theft and fraud involving a woman calling herself Mei Lin." The words hit like physical blows. Mei Lin's hand went to her throat, her breath catching. Gideon's expression didn't change, but his knuckles whitened on the rifle. "My wife's name is Mei Lin Hale, and she's not calling herself anything. That's who she is." Thornton's eyebrows rose slightly. "Your wife? I see. Then you should know, Mr. Hale, that the woman you married is wanted for theft of valuable property and attempted extortion. Mr. Zhao has been more than patient, but his generosity has limits. He's prepared to press formal charges unless she returns what was stolen and provides written confirmation that she will make no further claims. She didn't steal anything, Gideon said flatly. Mr. Zhao's household inventory suggests otherwise. Jewelry, silk garments, cash, all missing after she departed his employment. His employment? Gideon's voice took on a dangerous edge. That what he's calling it now? Thornton's face remained professionally neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, awareness that the story wasn't quite as simple as he was presenting it. I'm not here to debate the nature of their association. I'm here to recover stolen property and resolve this matter before it becomes a legal proceeding that would benefit no one. Especially not Jin Zhao, when the truth comes out. Mei Lin's voice cut through the cold air as she stepped out onto the porch. Gideon shot her a look that said, "Stay inside," but she ignored it. She'd spent months running from this confrontation. She was done hiding. Thornton's gaze fixed on her with obvious recognition. "Miss Lin," "Mrs. Hale," she corrected coldly. "Mrs. Hale, this doesn't need to be difficult. Simply return what you took, sign a statement promising no further contact or claims against Mr. Zhao, and we can all move forward. I took nothing but the clothes I was wearing and money I'd earned honestly. Everything Jin Zhao claims I stole was either payment he owed me or items he gave me himself before I refused his advances." That's not Mr. Zhao's recollection of events. Jin Zhao's recollection is convenient fiction designed to punish a woman who dared say no to him. Mei Lin descended the porch steps, her chin high despite the fear racing through her veins. He wanted me as his mistress. When I refused, he destroyed my reputation with lies. Now he wants me to confess to crimes I didn't commit so he can feel vindicated in his cruelty. Thornton's expression remained carefully blank. "Do you have any evidence to support these accusations? Do you have any evidence to support his? Or are you simply taking the word of a wealthy man over the word of a Chinese woman he tried to own?" The attorney's jaw tightened slightly. "I have documentation of missing property and witness statements confirming the timeline of the theft. Witness statements from Jin Zhao's employees, who would testify that the sky was green if he paid them enough." Mei Lin's hands trembled, but her voice stayed steady. "I know how this works, Mr. Thornton. A powerful man makes accusations, provides convenient evidence, and the legal system assumes guilt because I'm the wrong color, wrong gender, and have no social standing. But I'm not in San Francisco anymore. I'm not alone anymore. And I'm not going to let Jin Zhao rewrite history to soothe his wounded pride." "Brave words," Thornton said, "but unless you can prove your innocence, those words won't protect you from criminal charges." "She doesn't have to prove anything." Gideon moved to stand beside Mei Lin, his presence solid and unmovable. "Jin Zhao's the one making accusations. Let him come here and make them to my face. Let him provide real evidence, not paid testimony. Until then, you can ride back to San Francisco and tell him his lies don't reach this far." "The law reaches everywhere, Mr. Hale." "Then let the law come. But it better come with truth, instead of convenient stories from rich men who think they can buy anything they want, including justice." Gideon raised his rifle slightly, not quite threatening, but making his position clear. "This conversation's over. My wife stays here. Anyone who tries to take her against her will is going to have a serious problem with me." Thornton studied them both for a long moment, his expression calculating. "You're making a mistake. Mr. Zhao has resources, connections. Fighting him will only make this harder." "Harder than what?" Mei Lin asked. "Harder than having my life destroyed with lies? Harder than being treated as property instead of a person? There's nothing Jin Zhao can do to me that's worse than what he's already done. He can put you in prison. He can try." She stepped closer to Gideon, felt his hand find hers. "But I'd rather die free on this mountain than live as his prisoner in San Francisco. So you tell Jin Zhao that Mei Lin isn't afraid anymore. Tell him she found something he could never give her, a partner who sees her worth. Tell him she's done running." Thornton's horse stamped nervously, sensing the tension. The attorney gathered his reins, his face unreadable. "I'll relay your position to my client, but I urge you to reconsider. This doesn't end well for people who defy men like Jin Zhao." "Maybe it's time someone did," Gideon said. Thornton turned his horse and rode back down the mountain without another word, disappearing into the pine trees like an unwelcome dream. But the damage was done. The threat was no longer abstract. It was real, documented, and heading back to San Francisco with news that Mei Lin wasn't going to capitulate quietly. Mei Lin's legs gave out the moment Thornton disappeared from view. She sat down hard on the porch steps, her whole body shaking with delayed reaction. Gideon knelt beside her, setting the rifle aside to pull her into his arms. Hey, you're all right. He's gone. For now. But he'll be back. Or someone else will come. Jin Zhao won't stop until he's destroyed me completely. Her voice broke. I should leave. I should go somewhere even more remote where... Stop. Gideon's hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. You're not going anywhere. This is your home. I'm your husband. Whatever comes, we face it together. Remember? This isn't your fight. The hell it isn't. You became my fight the moment I put that ring on your finger. Before that even, the moment you stepped off that stage and looked the whole damn town in the eye without flinching. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. I meant what I said. Anyone who tries to take you has to go through me. And I promise you, Mei Lin, I'm not easy to go through. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that love and determination could stand against wealth and power, and a legal system designed to favor men like Jin Zhao. But she'd learned the hard way that wanting didn't make things true. What if it's not enough? What if they come with warrants, with marshals, then we'll deal with it. But we're not borrowing trouble before it arrives. He pulled her to her feet. Come inside, you're freezing. The rest of the day passed in tense normalcy. They went through the motions of daily tasks, but both of them were distracted, jumping at small sounds, watching the trail for more unwelcome visitors. When night fell, they lay together by the fire, but sleep came fitfully. Tell me about him, Gideon said quietly into the darkness. Tell me everything about Jin Zhao. Mei Lin was silent for a long moment. Why? Because if we're going to fight him, I need to understand what we're up against. So she told him. The story came out in pieces, some parts easy and some so painful she had to stop and gather herself before continuing. She told him about arriving in San Francisco as a young woman, alone and desperate for work. About getting hired by Jin Zhao's household to do fine embroidery, a skill her mother had taught her back in China. About the merchant's growing attention, the gifts that weren't quite appropriate, the suggestions that made her skin crawl. At first I thought I was imagining it, she said, that maybe in America, wealthy men treated their employees differently. But then he started coming to the sewing room when no one else was there. Started saying things about how beautiful I was, how a woman like me deserved silk and jewels, how he could give me a life of luxury if I was smart enough to accept it. Gideon's arm tightened around her. Did he touch you? He tried. Once. I slapped him so hard I left a mark. She felt a grim satisfaction at the memory. That's when everything changed. The next day, expensive items started disappearing from the household. Jin Zhao's wife's jewelry, cash from the strongbox, bolts of silk from the storage room. And somehow, evidence pointed to me. He planted it. Of course he did, but he was careful. Made it look like I'd taken small amounts over time, hidden them away. When the accusations came, I had no defense except my word against his, and my word meant nothing. What happened then? He gave me a choice, delivered privately where no one else could hear. I could confess to the theft, accept his gracious forgiveness, and become his mistress. Or I could maintain my innocence and face criminal charges that would certainly lead to prison. Her voice hardened. I chose prison. But before the charges could be filed, I ran. Spent every penny I had on a ticket as far from San Francisco as the money would take me, then worked my way across the country doing any honest job I could find until I saw your advertisement. You should have told me all this before. Would you have married me if you'd known? In a heartbeat. He said it without hesitation. Woman brave enough to slap a powerful man and refuse to be owned? That's exactly the kind of partner I needed. Despite everything, Mei Lin felt a smile tug at her lips. You're a strange man, Gideon Hale. So I've been told. He pressed a kiss to her temple. But I'm your strange man, and that means Jin Zhao's problem just became mine. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Gideon rose with the sun, moving with obvious purpose. When Mei Lin asked what he was doing, he simply said, getting ready. Over the next week, the cabin transformed into something resembling a fortress. Gideon reinforced the doors and windows, installed heavy bars that could be dropped into place from inside. He moved their most valuable supplies into the root cellar, which could be sealed and defended if necessary. He cleaned and oiled every weapon they owned, teaching Mei Lin not just to shoot but to reload quickly, to fire from different positions, to treat the rifle as an extension of her own will. "You think it'll come to this?" she asked one afternoon as she practiced loading and firing with increasing speed. "Hope not. But hope's not a strategy, preparation is." He also rode to Iron Ridge, returning with news that he'd spoken to the territorial marshal. "Fellow's name is Hawkins. Decent man, from what I can tell." I explained the situation, that my wife's being pursued by false accusations from a man with more money than morals. Asked what our legal standing would be if someone tried to take her without proper cause. What did he say? Said any arrest warrant would have to come through him first. Said he'd want to see evidence before he'd enforce it. And said if anyone tried to take you without going through proper channels, he'd consider it kidnapping and respond accordingly. Gideon set a document on the table. Also had him draw up an affidavit stating the timeline of when you arrived here, the circumstances of our marriage, and your character as observed by Iron Ridge citizens who witnessed you saving those men in the blizzard. Mei Lin picked up the document, reading through the careful legal language that painted her as a capable, brave woman who'd proven her worth to the community. Several signatures adorned the bottom: Dr. Matthews, Marshal Hawkins, Samuel Morrison, even Martha Morrison. They signed for me. You earned it. Folks might have been suspicious at first, but you changed their minds through action. That counts for something. It counted for more than something. It counted for hope, tangible, documented hope that maybe this fight wasn't as hopeless as she'd feared. March arrived with the first real hints of thaw. The snow began retreating from lower elevations, revealing brown earth and the first brave shoots of green. Birds returned, filling the mornings with song. The world was waking up, and with it came both promise and danger. Danger arrived on a gray afternoon when 5 riders appeared on the mountain trail. Gideon spotted them from a distance, immediately recognizing Thornton among the group. The others were harder men, hired muscle, by the look of them, wearing trail dust and carrying weapons with the ease of professionals. "They're here," he said quietly. Mei Lin joined him at the window, her face pale but set. "How many?" 5. Thornton and 4 others. Gun hands, most likely. "What do we do?" Gideon's jaw tightened. "We defend what's ours." He positioned Mei Lin in the loft with the smaller rifle, giving her a clear sight line to the approach but good cover. Then he took his own position near the door, rifle ready, with his pistol within easy reach. The riders stopped 20 yards from the cabin. Thornton dismounted, holding what looked like official papers. "Mr. Hale, I have a warrant for the arrest of Mei Lin on charges of theft and fraud. I'm authorized to take her into custody by order of the San Francisco courts." "Let me see that warrant," Gideon called back. "Open your door and I'll show you." "Slide it under. I can read from here." Thornton hesitated, then approached the door and pushed the document underneath. Gideon picked it up, scanning the legal language quickly. It looked official enough, signatures, seals, the whole apparatus of legal authority, but something about it nagged at him. "This warrant's dated 2 weeks ago," he said. "Why is it only reaching Montana now?" "Legal processes take time, Mr. Hale, but the warrant is valid. I need you to produce your wife immediately." "And if I don't?" "Then we'll have to take her by force. I'd rather not have this turn violent, but those are my instructions if you refuse to cooperate." From her position in the loft, Mei Lin's voice rang out clear and strong. "That warrant is fraudulent. The dates don't match, the jurisdiction is wrong for territorial enforcement, and the signature belongs to a judge who retired 6 months ago. I may not be a lawyer, Mr. Thornton, but I paid attention when Jin Zhao's associates were manufacturing evidence against me before. You're going to have to do better than forged papers." Thornton's face flushed. "You're in no position to question legal documents." "But I am," a new voice called out. Everyone turned to see Marshal Hawkins riding up the trail with 2 deputies, all 3 armed and looking decidedly unfriendly toward Thornton's group. "Marshal," Thornton said with forced pleasantness, "this doesn't concern territorial law. This is a matter between California and—" "Any arrest warrant executed in my territory concerns me," Hawkins interrupted. especially when the warrant in question is about as legitimate as a $3 bill. Judge Marcus Yee retired last September. I know because he sent a letter to every territorial marshal in the West informing us of the fact. So whoever signed that paper, it wasn't him. Thornton's expression went carefully blank. There must be some mistake in the paperwork, but the substance of the charges remains valid. Then get a real warrant from a real judge and come back through proper channels. Until then, you and your friends are going to turn around and leave my territory before I arrest all of you for attempted kidnapping. Mr. Zhao won't accept this delay. Mr. Zhao can write a strongly worded letter for all I care. The law's the law, even for wealthy men who think they can buy their way around it. Hawkins' hand rested on his pistol. Now, mount up and ride out. You've got 10 seconds before this gets uncomfortable. For a tense moment, the hired guns looked ready to test the marshal's resolve. But Hawkins and his deputies were positioned well, clearly prepared for trouble, and the odds had shifted decisively. Thornton made a sharp gesture to his men. This isn't over, he said, directing the words toward the cabin. Maybe not, Gideon called back. But it's over for today, and if you come back without proper cause, you'll find out just how permanent over can be. The 5 riders retreated down the mountain, leaving the marshal and his deputies near the cabin. Gideon emerged, Mei Lin climbing down from the loft to join him. Appreciate the timing, Gideon said to Hawkins. Got word from a friend in San Francisco that someone was asking questions about Montana warrants for Chinese women. Figured it might be related to your situation. Hawkins studied the forged warrant. This is crude work. Desperate, even. Jinzhou must want you pretty badly to risk something this obvious. What happens now? Mei Lin asked. Now we wait and see if he's stupid enough to try again with a legitimate warrant. If he does, we'll fight it through proper legal channels. If he doesn't, then this whole thing might just die out. Hawkins handed the forged document back to Gideon. Keep that as evidence of harassment. Might come in useful. After the marshal left, Gideon and Mei Lin stood together on the porch, watching the last of the riders disappear down the trail. The confrontation had ended without bloodshed, but the threat still hung in the air like the smell of distant smoke. He won't stop, Mei Lin said quietly. Jin Zhao doesn't forgive being defied. Then we'll be ready next time. Gideon pulled her close. But we won, Mei Lin. Today we won. That counts for something. She leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. I'm tired of fighting. I know, but you're good at it. We both are. He tilted her chin up to meet his eyes, and we're better together than either of us ever was alone. That night, as they lay by the fire, Mei Lin traced the scar on Gideon's face with gentle fingers. When I first saw this, she said, I thought it made you look dangerous. I am dangerous. I know, but also kind, also patient, also capable of tenderness that surprised me. She kissed the scar softly. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever. What's that? The ability to hope. To believe that standing up to cruelty might actually matter. To imagine a future that doesn't involve running or hiding. Her hand moved to rest over his heart. You've given me a reason to fight instead of flee. Gideon covered her hand with his own. You've given me something too. Made me remember that not everyone lies. Not everyone betrays. Made me believe that maybe love isn't weakness after all. Maybe it's the strongest thing there is. They came together with the desperate tenderness of people who'd found something precious and were determined to protect it. Outside, the mountain wind whispered through the pines, carrying the promise of spring and the lingering threat of winter's return. But inside the cabin, wrapped in each other's arms, Gideon and Mei Lin found temporary peace in their shared warmth, their mutual determination, and the fierce bond that had grown from practical arrangement into something worth fighting for. As dawn approached, Mei Lin spoke into the darkness. Whatever happens, I want you to know something. What? If I had to choose again, between accepting Jin Zhao's demands and running to answer your advertisement, I'd make the same choice every time. Even knowing how hard it would be, even knowing the danger that would follow, I'd still choose you. Choose this. Choose us. Gideon's arms tightened around her. That makes 2 of us. They fell asleep as the first light touched the mountain peaks, 2 people bound together by more than marriage, bound by choice, by respect, by hard-won trust, and the kind of love that was forged in fire and strengthened by every challenge it faced. Spring arrived in earnest, transforming the mountain from white wilderness into a riot of color and life. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows in purple and gold. Streams ran fast with snowmelt, and the air filled with the sound of returning wildlife. The world felt reborn, full of possibility, and for nearly 3 weeks, Gideon and Mei Lin allowed themselves to believe that maybe the threat had passed. They were working together in the small garden plot Mei Lin had insisted on starting when the rider appeared. This time, it wasn't Thornton or hired guns. It was a young courier wearing the dust of hard travel, leading a tired horse up the mountain trail. Gideon straightened from the furrow he was digging, his hand instinctively moving toward the rifle he'd propped against a nearby tree. But the rider raised both hands in a gesture of peace. "Mr. Hale? I'm not here for trouble, just carrying a message." He pulled an envelope from his saddlebag. "From San Francisco. Lady paid me good money to make sure it reached you personally." Gideon took the envelope, noting the fine paper and elegant script. The return address simply read, "A friend." He handed the courier payment for his trouble plus extra for feed and water for the horse, then waited until the young man had started back down the mountain before opening the letter. Mei Lin stood beside him, her hands dirty from planting seeds, her face tight with apprehension. "What does it say?" Gideon read silently first, his expression growing darker with each line. Then he read aloud. "Mr. Hale, you don't know me, but I know what Jin Zhao did to Mei Lin because he did the same to my sister 3 years ago. She refused him, he destroyed her reputation, and she took her own life rather than live with the shame he manufactured. I've watched him do this to other women since then, always with the same pattern. Pursue, get rejected, punish. But Mei Lin is the first who ran instead of breaking, the first who survived. Jin Zhao can't tolerate that. He's obtained a legitimate warrant this time through connections in the territorial court. Marshal Hawkins won't be able to stop it. The warrant will be executed within 2 weeks by federal authorities who have no loyalty to your territory or its people. If Mei Lin goes to trial in San Francisco, Jin Zhao will make sure she's convicted regardless of evidence. I'm writing to warn you because my sister deserved better than what she got, and Mei Lin deserves the chance my sister never had. Run, hide, or fight, but don't let him win. Signed, a friend who remembers." Mei Lin's hand went to her throat. His sister killed herself? Apparently. Gideon reread the letter, his jaw tight. And he's been doing this for years. Multiple women. 2 weeks. Mei Lin's voice was hollow. We have 2 weeks before federal marshals come with a warrant. Even Hawkins can't challenge. Gideon folded the letter carefully. Then we have 2 weeks to decide what we're going to do about it. They spent that evening in heavy discussion, weighing options that all felt inadequate. They could run, pack up, and disappear deeper into the wilderness where even federal authorities would have trouble finding them. But that meant abandoning the home they'd built, living as fugitives, always looking over their shoulders. They could fight the warrant in court, but as the letter warned, Jin Zhao had resources and connections that could manufacture whatever evidence he needed for conviction. They could appeal to higher authorities, but frontier justice moved slowly, and Jin Zhao's influence reached far. "There has to be something we're not seeing," Mei Lin said, pacing the cabin with restless energy. "Some way to fight him that doesn't involve running or hoping the court suddenly become fair. The only way to truly stop him is to destroy his credibility completely, make it impossible for anyone to believe his accusations." Gideon stared into the fire, thinking, but how do you prove a negative? How do you prove you didn't steal things when he's the one holding all the supposed evidence? You don't prove the negative, you prove the pattern. Mei Lin stopped pacing, her eyes suddenly sharp. The letter said he's done this to multiple women. What if we could find them? What if we could get their testimony showing that Jin Zhao has a history of making false accusations against women who reject him? Would a court even listen? Maybe not a San Francisco court where Jin Zhao has influence, but what about the territorial court here? What about the federal authorities themselves? Her mind was racing now, connecting possibilities. If we could show that this isn't an isolated case of theft, but part of a larger pattern of harassment and false accusation, the warrant might be challenged on grounds of bad faith prosecution. Gideon stood, moving to stand in front of her. That's a hell of a long shot. It's better than waiting for federal marshals to drag me away in chains. She grabbed his hands. The woman who wrote this letter, she said there were others. If we could find even 2 or 3 women willing to testify about what Jin Zhao did to them, willing to corroborate the pattern, it might be enough to at least delay the warrant, buy us time to build a real defense. Finding them would mean going to San Francisco, walking right into Jin Zhao's territory. Then I'll go alone. You stay here where it's safe. Absolutely not. Gideon's voice was flat with finality. We've been through this. Whatever happens, we face it together. But Gideon, if something happens to you because of my past, it's our past now, our future too, and I'll be damned if I let you walk into that city alone. He cupped her face in his scarred hands. Besides, you'll need someone to watch your back, someone who's not afraid of wealthy merchants or their hired guns, someone who happens to be very good at not dying when the odds are bad. Despite the gravity of the situation, Mei Lin felt a smile tug at her lips. You really are a stubborn man. Takes one to know one. They left for San Francisco 3 days later, after making arrangements for their cabin and animals with Tom Bridger, who'd recovered from his broken leg and insisted on repaying their kindness by watching over their property. The journey was long and hard, covering territory that grew progressively more civilized as they descended from the mountains into the valleys and finally to the coast. San Francisco hit Mei Lin like a physical assault. The noise, the crowds, the overwhelming press of humanity after months in mountain solitude, it was disorienting and suffocating. But worse than the sensory overload was the fear that crept up her spine as they rode through streets she'd once walked with hope, past buildings where she'd once worked with pride, into a city that had shown her just how cruel civilized society could be. Gideon stayed close, his presence solid and reassuring. They took a room in a modest boarding house far from the wealthy districts where Jin Zhao held sway, and that evening they began their search for the woman who'd written the warning letter. It took 2 days of careful inquiries, discreet questions asked in the Chinese Quarter where Mei Lin still had a few contacts who remembered her before the scandal. Finally, a name emerged. Margaret Chen, sister to Susan Chen, who'd died 3 years ago. Margaret worked as a seamstress in a shop near the docks. They found her closing up shop on a gray evening, a woman in her 30s with tired eyes and quick hands. When Mei Lin introduced herself, Margaret's face went pale. You're alive. I didn't know if the letter would reach you in time. It did, and we're here because we need your help. Mei Lin explained their plan, to find other women Jin Zhao had victimized and gather testimony proving his pattern of false accusations. Margaret listened in silence, her expression growing more pained. There were others. I know of at least 3 women besides my sister who Jin Zhao targeted the same way. But getting them to testify. She shook her head. Most of them have tried to rebuild their lives. Coming forward would mean reliving the shame, facing judgment all over again. And Jin Zhao has power. Women who speak against him tend to find their lives getting even worse. What if they knew they weren't alone? Mei Lin leaned forward. What if they knew that standing together might actually stop him from doing this to anyone else? That their testimony might protect future women from Susan's fate? Margaret's eyes welled with tears. My sister was gentle, kind. When Jin Zhao started paying attention to her, she thought it was an honor. Then he made it clear what kind of attention he wanted, and when she refused, he destroyed her so thoroughly that she couldn't see any way forward. She hung herself in her room while I was at market. Her voice broke. If there's any chance of stopping him, of making sure no other family loses someone they love the way I lost Susan, I'll do whatever it takes. Over the next week, Margaret helped them find the other women. There was Alice Wong, who now ran a small restaurant under her married name, trying to forget the year Jin Zhao had made her life hell. There was Grace Liu, who'd left San Francisco entirely, but came back when she heard that someone was finally standing up to the merchant who'd nearly broken her. And there was Emma Yi, who still bore the scars, both visible and invisible, of Jin Zhao's campaign to punish her refusal. Each woman had the same story with slight variations. Jin Zhao had pursued them, promised them wealth and position if they became his mistress, then turned vicious when they declined. Stolen property would be discovered. Witnesses would come forward with damaging testimony. Reputations would be destroyed. The only difference was that these women had survived the assault on their character, had found ways to endure and eventually rebuild, though none had escaped unscathed. Getting them to agree to testify was harder. Fear ran deep, and Jin Zhao's shadow was long even for those who'd escaped San Francisco. But slowly, painstakingly, Mei Lin and Gideon built trust. They shared their own story, showed the forged warrant, explained that this wasn't just about clearing Mei Lin's name, it was about exposing a predator who'd operated with impunity for too long. "He's counting on our silence," Mei Lin told them during a tense meeting in the back room of Alice's restaurant. "He's counting on shame and fear keeping us isolated, keeping us from comparing stories and realizing we're all victims of the same pattern. But what if we refuse to be silent? What if we stand together and show that his accusations aren't isolated incidents but calculated attacks?" "The courts won't care," Emma said bitterly. "We're Chinese women accusing a wealthy Chinese merchant. They'll assume we're lying to protect each other." "Maybe in San Francisco," Gideon spoke up, "but not in Montana territory. The judge there doesn't know Jin Zhao, doesn't owe him favors, and has seen what my wife is capable of. If we can get depositions from all of you, sworn statements attested by witnesses, we can present a case that this warrant is part of a pattern of harassment, not legitimate prosecution." "And if it doesn't work?" Grace asked quietly. "Then at least we tried." Mei Lin's voice was steady. "At least we fought instead of letting him win through our fear. And maybe, even if the courts don't listen, the community will. Maybe other women will hear about this and realize they don't have to accept abuse from powerful men. Maybe that's worth the risk." In the end, all 4 women agreed to provide sworn testimony. They found a lawyer willing to take their depositions, a young man named David Tam, who'd lost his own sister to suicide after a different wealthy man's cruelty and was eager to help expose such patterns of abuse. The depositions were detailed, corroborated by witnesses, and painted a damning picture of Jin Zhao's behavior over nearly a decade. But gathering evidence was only half the battle. They also needed to confront the man himself, to force him into a position where his lies became obvious. Gideon didn't like the idea. It felt too much like walking into a trap. But Mei Lin insisted. "He needs to see that I'm not afraid anymore, that his power over me is broken." She was preparing for the confrontation in their boarding house room, dressing in the finest clothes she'd been able to purchase, not to impress Jin Zhao, but to show that she'd risen above his attempts to destroy her. "And we need him to respond, preferably with threats or admissions we can document." "You're asking him to incriminate himself." "I'm counting on his arrogance. He's never faced real consequences before. Men like him always believe they're untouchable." They arranged the meeting through intermediaries, requesting a private discussion to settle matters regarding the outstanding accusations. Jin Zhao agreed, probably assuming Mei Lin had come to capitulate. They met in a tea house in the merchant district, neutral ground with enough foot traffic that violence would be noticed, but enough privacy for honest conversation. Jin Zhao arrived exactly on time, dressed in expensive silk, his expression confident and smug. He was a handsome man in his 50s, well-maintained and radiating the kind of power that came from wealth and influence. When he saw Mei Lin sitting across from him with Gideon standing behind her chair, his smile didn't falter, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Mei Lin, how unexpected to see you return to civilization. I'd heard you'd buried yourself in some mountain wasteland." "Mr. Zhao," Mei Lin's voice was perfectly level. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I assumed you'd finally come to your senses." He waved a dismissive hand. "The warrant can be withdrawn if you simply return what you took and sign a statement confirming that our association was exactly as I described it." "You mean if I confess to crimes I didn't commit and allow you to rewrite history to soothe your wounded ego?" Jin Zhao's expression hardened slightly. "Your pride has already cost you dearly. Continuing to deny the obvious will only make things worse. The only thing obvious is your pattern of targeting women who refuse your advances." Mei Lin pulled out copies of the depositions. "I have testimony from 4 women, lies purchased with promises or threats." Jin Zhao didn't even glance at the documents. "The courts won't believe a word of it. Perhaps not San Francisco courts, where you've bought influence. But federal authorities might be interested in evidence of systematic harassment and false prosecution, especially when one of those women committed suicide because of your campaign against her." For the first time, Jin Zhao's composure cracked slightly. Susan Chen was mentally unstable. Her death had nothing to do with me. Her sister disagrees. So do the 3 other women you've destroyed or attempted to destroy. So does the pattern of behavior that's remarkably consistent. Pursue, get rejected, punish. Mei Lin leaned forward. You thought I'd be like the others, thought I'd break or disappear or accept your terms to make the pain stop. But I didn't. I found something you can't comprehend. A partnership based on respect instead of power. A man who values my strength instead of trying to own it. Jin Zhao's gaze shifted to Gideon with contempt. A scarred mountain hermit? That's your great victory? Trading silk and servants for dirt and isolation? Better dirt and honesty than silk and slavery, Mei Lin shot back. I'd rather haul water and split wood as a free woman than live in luxury as your property. You were never going to be property. I offered you comfort, security, a position many women would envy. You offered to make me your mistress. When I refused, you tried to destroy my life. And when that didn't break me, you forged a warrant to drag me back and force compliance through legal channels. She stood, gathering the depositions. But I'm not here to negotiate or capitulate. I'm here to tell you that I'm fighting this warrant with everything I have. I'm going to expose your pattern of abuse. And whether the courts listen or not, whether I win or lose, the community will know what kind of man you really are. Jin Zhao's face flushed with anger. You're making a terrible mistake. I have resources you can't imagine, connections that reach into every corner of this territory. Fighting me will destroy not just you, but anyone who stands with you. His eyes fixed on Gideon with obvious threat. Including your mountain man. Gideon stepped forward, his hand resting on Mei Lin's shoulder. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute conviction. Let me tell you something about mountains, Mr. Zhao. They don't bend. They don't break. They stand against storms and wind and everything civilization throws at them, and they endure. My wife is like those mountains, strong enough to weather your worst and still stand tall. And I'm the kind of man who knows how to survive when the odds are impossible. So you bring your resources and connections. Bring your lawyers and warrants and hired guns. You'll find we're harder to destroy than the women you've terrorized before. We'll see. Jin Zhao stood, his composure somewhat restored but anger simmering beneath the surface. The warrant will be executed. Your wife will stand trial. And when she's convicted, she'll have years in prison to regret her foolish pride. Or, Mei Lin said calmly, your pattern of abuse will be exposed, your credibility will be destroyed, and you'll discover that wealth and power can't protect men who prey on women forever. Time will tell which of us is right. Jin Zhao left without another word, his exit radiating fury. The moment he was gone, Mei Lin's composure crumbled slightly. She sat down hard, her hands shaking. That was harder than I expected. Gideon knelt beside her chair. You did well. Didn't let him rattle you, didn't show fear. Made it clear you're not backing down. Did you see his face when I mentioned the depositions? He wasn't expecting that. He wasn't expecting you to fight at all. Men like him are used to people folding. Gideon took her trembling hands in his steady ones. But we've got a problem. He's going to move faster now. That warrant will be executed sooner rather than later. Then we need to move faster too. Mei Lin straightened, forcing steel back into her spine. We have the depositions. We have evidence of the forged warrant. We need to get back to Montana and present everything to the territorial authorities before federal marshals arrive to execute Jin Zhao's warrant. They left San Francisco the next morning, riding hard for Montana with document cases full of depositions, affidavits, and evidence. The journey that had taken them 10 days going west they made in 7 going east, pushing themselves and their horses to the limit. Every day they expected to see federal marshals riding toward them. Every night Mei Lin woke from nightmares of being dragged back to San Francisco in chains. But they made it. They rode into Iron Ridge exhausted and trail-worn but carrying hope in the form of testimony that just might save Mei Lin's freedom. Marshal Hawkins listened to everything, read through all the depositions, and sat back in his chair with a long exhale. This is good evidence of a pattern. Real good. But I'll be honest with you, it might not be enough. Federal warrants have their own authority. Even with all this, they might still take her into custody pending trial. Then what do we do? Gideon asked. We present this to the territorial judge first. Get a formal review of the warrant's legitimacy before federal marshals arrive. If Judge Morrison determines the warrant was obtained through fraudulent means or bad faith prosecution, he can request delay pending investigation. It's not a guarantee, but it's your best shot. They filed the motion that afternoon. Judge Morrison, a fair man with a reputation for not being swayed by wealth or influence, agreed to review the evidence. The hearing was scheduled for 3 days later. Those 3 days felt like 3 years. Gideon and Mei Lin returned to their mountain cabin, needing the familiar peace of their home after weeks of travel and stress. They fell back into their routines with the desperate normalcy of people trying to hold on to something solid while the ground shifted beneath them. On the second night, lying together by the fire, Mei Lin spoke into the darkness. If they take me anyway, if all of this isn't enough, don't. Gideon, we have to talk about the possibility. If I'm convicted, I could be in prison for years. You can't wait that long. You shouldn't have to. He pulled her tighter against him. Try to stop me. I'm serious. You deserve a life, a real partner who can actually be here with you. I have a real partner, and wherever you are, that's where I'll be. If they send you to prison, I'll be in the town closest to that prison. I'll visit every day they allow. I'll work to get you out, to prove your innocence, to overturn the conviction, however long it takes. His voice was fierce. You don't get to push me away to protect me. We're bound together now for better or worse, and I'm not letting go. Mei Lin turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. How did I get so lucky to find you? Luck had nothing to do with it. You answered an advertisement from a scarred hermit offering hard work and cold winters. That took courage. Everything since then has just been us being too stubborn to quit. She kissed him then, deep and desperate, trying to pour everything she felt into that connection, love and fear and gratitude and hope, all tangled together. When they finally pulled apart, Gideon wiped her tears with gentle thumbs. Whatever the judge decides, whatever happens next, you're not alone in this. You haven't been alone since you stepped off that stage last November, remember that. I will. She settled back against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. I love you, Gideon Hale. I should have said it before, but I'm saying it now. I love you. His arms tightened around her. I love you too. Knew it that night in the blizzard when you risked everything to come after me. Probably knew it even before that, but that's when I couldn't deny it anymore. They fell asleep holding each other, drawing strength from their connection, from the partnership that had transformed from practical arrangement into the kind of love that faced down danger without flinching. The hearing day arrived gray and cold, with clouds threatening rain. The courtroom was packed, word had spread about the case, and half of Iron Ridge seemed determined to witness the proceedings. Mei Lin wore her best dress, her hair neatly arranged, her expression calm despite the terror racing through her veins. Gideon sat directly behind her, close enough that she could feel his presence like a shield at her back. Judge Morrison called the court to order, and the battle for Mei Lin's freedom began in earnest. Judge Morrison was a lean man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that had seen enough frontier justice to recognize truth from fabrication. He reviewed the warrant first, reading it with methodical care while the courtroom waited in tense silence. Finally, he looked up. This warrant appears legitimate on its face. Proper signatures, correct seals, appropriate jurisdictional language. He set it aside. However, Mrs. Hale has filed a motion challenging the warrant's validity based on evidence of fraudulent prosecution and a pattern of harassment by the complainant. I'm prepared to hear arguments. David Tam, the young lawyer from San Francisco who'd agreed to represent Mei Lin pro bono, stood and approached the bench. Your Honor, we have depositions from 4 women who testify to a consistent pattern of behavior by Jin Zhao. In each case, the complainant pursued these women romantically, was rejected, and subsequently filed false accusations of theft or fraud. One of these women took her own life as a result of the harassment. The pattern is clear, documented, and directly relevant to the charges against Mrs. Hale. Objection. A well-dressed attorney representing Jin Zhao's interests stood quickly. His name was Charles Westbrook, and he had the polished bearing of someone accustomed to winning. These depositions are hearsay and character assassination. The warrant before this court concerns specific allegations of theft against Mrs. Hale, not unproven accusations against my client. The depositions are sworn testimony attested by witnesses, Tam countered, and they establish a pattern that directly contradicts the legitimacy of the current charges. Judge Morrison gestured for both lawyers to approach. After a brief, intense discussion conducted in low voices, he made his ruling. I'll allow the depositions into evidence. The court recognizes that pattern evidence can be relevant in determining whether charges represent legitimate prosecution or harassment. However, he fixed Tam with a stern look, you'll need to connect this pattern directly to the current case. Proceed. Over the next 2 hours, Tam methodically presented each deposition. Margaret Chen testified through written statement about her sister Susan's destruction at Jin Zhao's hands. Alice Wong described how Jin Zhao had planted stolen goods in her belongings after she refused his advances. Grace Liu recounted the campaign of lies that had driven her from San Francisco. Emma Yi spoke of threats and intimidation that had left her afraid to sleep at night. Each story was corroborated by witnesses, by documentation, by evidence that showed Jin Zhao's accusations always followed the same pattern: pursuit, rejection, retaliation through false claims of theft. When Tam finished, he called Mei Lin to the stand. She walked forward with her head high, placed her hand on the Bible, despite her lack of religious conviction, and swore to tell the truth. Sitting in the witness chair, she could see Gideon in the gallery, his eyes steady on hers, giving her strength. Mrs. Hale, Tam began gently, please tell the court how you came to work for Jin Zhao. Mei Lin took a breath and began. She told the story without embellishment, how she'd needed work after arriving in San Francisco, how her skill with embroidery had gotten her hired by Jin Zhao's household, how the merchant's attention had gradually shifted from professional to personal. He started visiting the sewing room when I was alone, brought me gifts I didn't ask for, expensive silk, jade jewelry, things that made the other servants whisper. When I tried to refuse, he'd say it was just appreciation for good work. But the way he looked at me, she paused, gathering herself. I knew what he wanted. And when did his intentions become explicit? 3 months after I started working there, he came to the sewing room late one evening and told me I was too beautiful to waste my life on needlework. Said he could give me a comfortable life, fine clothes, a place in society if I became his mistress. Her voice was steady but cold. I told him I wasn't interested, that I wanted to earn my living honestly through my work. How did he respond? He was surprised at first. I don't think anyone had refused him before. Then he got angry, said I was ungrateful, that I didn't understand the honor he was offering. He tried to grab me to force a kiss. I slapped him hard enough to leave a mark. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Westbrook half rose to object, but Judge Morrison waved him down. Continue, Mrs. Hale. The next day, things started disappearing from the household. Mrs. Zhao's jade bracelet, money from the strongbox, bolts of valuable silk. And somehow, evidence kept appearing that pointed to me, a pawnbroker who claimed I'd sold him Mrs. Zhao's bracelet, though I'd never been to his shop. Silk scraps found in my room that matched stolen bolts, coins hidden in my belongings. Did you take any of these items? No. I took nothing except the wages I'd earned and the clothes on my back when I fled. She looked directly at Judge Morrison. Jin Zhao planted everything, made sure witnesses would testify against me, gave me a choice, become his mistress, and he'd make the accusations disappear or maintain my innocence and face prison. What did you choose? I chose to run. Spent everything I had getting as far from San Francisco as possible. Worked my way across the country until I saw Mr. Hale's advertisement for a wife. His honesty appealed to me after so many lies, so I answered it. Tam nodded. And has Jin Zhao left you alone since you left San Francisco? No. First, he sent an attorney with a forged warrant. When that failed, he obtained this legitimate warrant through connections in the territorial court system. He won't stop until he destroys me completely, just like he destroyed the other women who refused him. Westbrook stood for cross-examination, his expression skeptical. Mrs. Hale, isn't it true that you have no actual proof Jin Zhao planted evidence against you? I have the pattern. 4 other women with identical stories. 4 women who might be lying to help you avoid justice. 4 women who have nothing to gain and everything to lose by coming forward. One of them is dead because of what Jin Zhao did to her. Mei Lin's voice shook with controlled anger. Why would Margaret Chen lie about her sister's suicide? Why would Alice Wong risk her business to testify? Why would any of them put themselves through this unless they were telling the truth? Perhaps because you convinced them to, or paid them, or, I have no money to pay anyone, Mei Lin interrupted. I have no influence, no power, no resources except the truth and the courage to speak it. Everything I own fits in a single carpet bag. I couldn't bribe or coerce anyone even if I wanted to. Westbrook changed tactics. You admit you worked in Jin Zhao's household? Yes. And you admit you had access to the items that were stolen? I had access to many things in that household. That doesn't mean I took them. But you can't prove you didn't. Can you prove I did? Real proof, not paid testimony from witnesses with reason to lie? She leaned forward. Where are these items I supposedly stole? If I took jade and silk and money, where is it? I arrived in Montana Territory with nothing but worn clothes and a few personal possessions. No jade, no silk, no unexplained wealth. Where did it all go? Westbrook faltered slightly. It was a good question, one that hadn't been adequately addressed in the warrant. You could have sold it, hidden it, given it away. Then show the court evidence of these transactions. Show me selling jade in some pawn shop, depositing money in some bank, anything that proves I actually possess stolen goods. You can't, because those transactions never happened, because I never stole anything. Judge Morrison intervened. Mr. Westbrook, does your evidence include any documentation of Mrs. Hale possessing or disposing of the allegedly stolen property? Westbrook shuffled through papers, clearly uncomfortable. The warrant relies primarily on witness testimony regarding the missing items and evidence found in Mrs. Hale's room. Evidence that was conveniently discovered after she refused Jin Zhao's advances, Tam interjected. Evidence that appeared in her room despite her having no opportunity to steal the items in question. Your Honor, this is speculation. It's reasonable doubt, Judge Morrison corrected, and it's substantial. He turned to Mei Lin. Mrs. Hale, you may step down. As Mei Lin returned to her seat, Gideon reached forward and squeezed her hand. She could see approval in his eyes, pride in the way she'd held her ground under hostile questioning. Tam called his final witness, Marshal Hawkins, who testified about the forged warrant Thornton had attempted to use, about Jin Zhao's obvious desperation to apprehend Mei Lin by any means necessary, about the suspicious timing of legitimate warrant appearing so quickly after the forgery had been exposed. In my experience, Hawkins said, legitimate prosecutions don't require forged documents as a backup plan. That suggests someone who's more interested in punishment than justice. When both sides had presented their cases, Judge Morrison called for a recess to review the evidence. The courtroom emptied into the cold afternoon, people clustering in groups to debate what they'd heard. Mei Lin and Gideon stood apart from the crowd, neither wanting to hear speculation about her fate. You were incredible in there, Gideon said quietly. I was terrified. Didn't show. You looked at that lawyer like he was a coyote trying to steal chickens, and you were the one holding the shotgun. He pulled her close, despite the public setting. Whatever Morrison decides, you fought well. That matters. It'll matter more if he rules in our favor. They waited an hour before being called back inside. Judge Morrison had returned to the bench, his expression grave. When everyone had settled, he spoke. I've reviewed all evidence presented, including the depositions, testimony, and the warrant itself. This is an unusual case that requires careful consideration of both legal procedure and natural justice. He paused, organizing his thoughts. The warrant before this court is technically legitimate in its construction. However, the circumstances surrounding its issuance raise serious questions about whether it represents good faith prosecution or harassment disguised as legal process. Mei Lin's hand found Gideon's, their fingers intertwining with desperate hope. The pattern evidence is compelling, Morrison continued. 4 women testifying to identical treatment by the same man, with documented consequences including 1 suicide. The timing of accusations consistently following rejection of romantic advances. The lack of any physical evidence connecting Mrs. Hale to the allegedly stolen property. The attempt to use a forged warrant when legitimate channels initially failed. Taken together, these facts paint a picture of systematic abuse of the legal system to punish women who refused Jin Zhao's advances. Westbrook started to rise, but Morrison waved him down. I'm not saying Jin Zhao is guilty of harassment. That's not the question before this court. The question is whether this warrant represents legitimate prosecution. and based on the evidence presented, I find reasonable doubt exists regarding its legitimacy." He picked up his gavel. "Therefore, I'm issuing a stay on the warrant pending full investigation by federal authorities into Jin Zhao's pattern of accusations. Mrs. Hale will remain free during this investigation. Furthermore, I'm forwarding all depositions and evidence to the U.S. Marshal's Office with a recommendation that they investigate Jin Zhao for potential abuse of legal process." The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the courtroom like thunder. For a moment, Mei Lin couldn't breathe. Then the meaning of Morrison's words hit her fully, and she felt Gideon's arms come around her as her legs went weak with relief. "You're free," he whispered against her hair. "You're free." The courtroom erupted in noise, some celebrating, some protesting, everyone with an opinion. But Mei Lin heard none of it. She was crying too hard, relief and joy and the release of months of fear, all pouring out in desperate sobs against Gideon's chest. Tam approached them, grinning. "The stay is indefinite pending investigation, and trust me, once federal authorities start looking into Jin Zhao's pattern, they're going to find more than enough to make this warrant disappear permanently. You won this, Mrs. Hale." "We won," Mei Lin corrected, pulling back to wipe her eyes. "All of us, Margaret, Alice, Grace, Emma, everyone who had the courage to speak up. This victory belongs to them, too." Outside the courthouse, Martha Morrison was waiting with genuine warmth in her smile. "I told you, you've got friends here, people who see you for who you are." Over the next few days, word of the ruling spread. In San Francisco, the news hit Jin Zhao's reputation like an avalanche. The depositions became public record, and suddenly, the merchant who'd wielded such power found himself facing questions, whispers, social consequences. Several business partners quietly severed connections. His wife, finally learning the full truth of his behavior, filed for separation. The community that had once believed his lies began reconsidering every accusation he'd ever made. Margaret Chen sent a letter that Mei Lin read through tears. "Susan didn't die for nothing after all. Your courage gave meaning to her suffering. Thank you for fighting when the rest of us couldn't." But the most important changes happened on the mountain. Mei Lin and Gideon returned to their cabin with a freedom neither had fully felt before. The shadow of Jin Zhao's threat had been lifted, the fear of losing each other removed. What remained was simply them. Two people who'd found in each other exactly what they needed, exactly when they needed it. Spring deepened into summer. The garden Mei Lin had planted flourished, yielding vegetables that supplemented their diet of hunted meat and stored grain. She'd become genuinely skilled at mountain life, moving through tasks with confidence born of experience. Gideon, for his part, had become more than just capable. He'd become genuinely happy, his rare smiles appearing more frequently, his silences comfortable rather than defensive. On a warm evening in late June, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Mei Lin had been quiet all day, contemplative in a way that made Gideon study her with concern. "Something on your mind?" She turned to him, and he saw something in her eyes that made his breath catch. Joy mixed with nervousness, excitement tempered with uncertainty. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them. Gideon went absolutely still, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, wonder spread across his scarred face. "You're certain?" "I've known for 2 weeks. Wanted to be sure before I told you." She placed her hand over her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a child." Gideon moved so fast he startled her, pulling her into his arms and lifting her clean off the ground in a rare display of unbridled emotion. When he set her down, his eyes were wet. "A child. Our child." He placed his large, scarred hand gently over hers on her stomach. "I never thought... After everything I'd seen, everything I'd done in the war, I didn't think I deserved something like this. A family." "You deserve everything," Mei Lin said fiercely. "You deserve happiness and love and a life full of all the good things you thought were lost to you. And I'm going to make sure you get them." That night, they talked for hours about the future, about expanding the cabin to make room for a child, about teaching their son or daughter to read the mountains the way Gideon had taught Mei Lin, about building something that would last beyond themselves. They made plans the way couples do when the world feels full of possibility, when fear has been defeated and hope is all that remains. The pregnancy progressed through summer into autumn. Mei Lin handled it with the same fierce determination she applied to everything else, refusing to be treated as fragile even when Gideon fretted over her doing tasks he considered too strenuous. Dr. Matthews came up from Iron Ridge once a month to check on her, pronouncing her disgustingly healthy and the baby developing perfectly. "Mountain living agrees with you," he said during his September visit. "Most women I see are worn down by frontier life. You seem to thrive on it." "I have a good partner," Mei Lin replied, watching Gideon through the window as he split wood with methodical precision. "Makes all the difference." Winter came early that year, but instead of the isolation feeling oppressive, it felt cozy. Gideon had built a cradle from pine wood, carved and sanded until it was smooth as silk. Mei Lin had sewn tiny clothes, embroidered with mountain flowers and pine trees, while Gideon worked beside her on wooden toys he shaped with patient hands. They transformed from two isolated individuals into a family unit preparing for new life. The baby came during a storm in late February, as if determined to make an entrance as dramatic as his parents' courtship. Mei Lin's labor started in the evening and lasted through the night, Gideon staying beside her the entire time, offering water and encouragement and his hand to squeeze when the pain peaked. Dr. Matthews had arrived the day before. Gideon had insisted he stay at the cabin for the last 2 weeks of pregnancy just in case, and he guided Mei Lin through the birth with calm competence. "One more push," Matthews encouraged. "Almost there." Mei Lin pushed with everything she had, and suddenly the cabin filled with a new sound, the fierce, angry cry of a newborn declaring his presence to the world. "It's a boy," Matthews announced, placing the squalling infant on Mei Lin's chest. "Strong lungs on this one." Mei Lin looked down at her son, red-faced, furious at being forced from his warm cocoon into cold air, tiny fists waving in protest, and felt love so intense it stole her breath. She'd thought she understood love when she fell for Gideon, but this was different. This was creation, continuation, hope made flesh. "He's perfect," she whispered. Gideon knelt beside the bed, staring at his son with an expression of absolute wonder. When Matthews placed the baby in his arms, the mountain man who'd survived war and years of isolation held the tiny life with infinite gentleness, tears streaming openly down his scarred face. "Hello, son," he said softly. "Welcome to the mountain." They named him Samuel, after the store owner who'd helped Gideon send that first letter seeking a wife. Samuel Morrison had inadvertently set in motion the chain of events that led to this moment, and it seemed right to honor that. The weeks after Samuel's birth were exhausting and beautiful in equal measure. Nights became a blur of feeding and rocking and precious little sleep. Days were punctuated by the baby's needs, everything else scheduled around his demanding presence. But neither Gideon nor Mei Lin would have changed a single moment. Gideon proved unexpectedly natural with the baby, his large hands somehow perfect for soothing Samuel when he fussed. He'd pace the cabin in the middle of the night, the infant cradled against his broad chest, humming tuneless songs that somehow always worked to calm the boy down. "You're better at this than I am," Mei Lin said one night, watching them from the bed. "Doubt that. You grew him from nothing. I'm just here to help raise him." "We're raising him together. Equal partners, remember?" "Equal partners," Gideon agreed, settling back beside her with Samuel nestled between them. Spring came again, bringing with it news from San Francisco. Jin Zhao had been formally charged with fraud and harassment after federal investigation uncovered even more victims willing to testify. His business had collapsed, his reputation destroyed, his power broken. He would spend years fighting legal battles of his own, with no guarantee of victory. "It's finally over," Mei Lin said when the letter from Margaret Chen arrived with the news. "He can't hurt anyone anymore." "You did that," Gideon said, "by refusing to be broken, by standing up when it mattered, by showing other women that fighting back was possible." She looked at him, at their son sleeping peacefully in his cradle, at the cabin that had become a true home. "We did that. None of this would have been possible alone." 1 year to the day after Mei Lin had stepped off the stage in Iron Ridge, they stood together on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains. Samuel was strapped to Gideon's chest in a carrier Mei Lin had sewn, the baby's dark eyes wide as he took in the colorful sky. "You ever regret answering my advertisement?" Gideon asked. Mei Lin laughed. "Not even once. You?" Best decision I ever made. He pulled her close with his free arm, careful not to jostle the baby. Thought I was just getting someone to help with cabin work. Got a partner, a wife, a family, a reason to believe the world isn't entirely terrible. We got lucky. No, Gideon corrected gently. We got brave. You were brave enough to run toward the unknown instead of accepting defeat. I was brave enough to admit I needed someone. We were both brave enough to let a practical arrangement become something real. Luck didn't do that. We did. Mei Lin tilted her head back to look at him, this scarred mountain man who'd offered her honesty when the world offered only lies, who'd stood beside her when she had to fight for her freedom, who'd loved her not despite her strength, but because of it. I love you, she said simply. I love you too. He kissed her softly, carefully, mindful of the baby between them. Both of you. As if on cue, Samuel made a small sound of contentment, his tiny hand wrapping around Mei Lin's finger. She looked down at him, this perfect combination of herself and Gideon, this new life born from their unlikely union. The mountains stood eternal around them, snow still capping the highest peaks, even as green spread through the valleys. Smoke curled from the cabin's chimney, promising warmth and comfort inside. Somewhere in the distance, an eagle cried out, the sound echoing across the wilderness they called home. This wasn't the life Mei Lin had imagined when she fled San Francisco in fear and desperation. It wasn't the life Gideon had expected when he'd written that blunt advertisement seeking a wife for practical purposes. It was better than either of them had dared to hope for. Harder, certainly, full of challenges and work that never ended, but also richer, deeper, more meaningful than comfort or ease could ever be. They'd found in each other what they'd both desperately needed, someone who saw their worth, valued their strength, stood beside them through storms both literal and metaphorical. They'd built more than a marriage. They'd built a partnership strong enough to withstand false accusations, powerful enemies, harsh winters, and all the challenges frontier life could throw at them. And now they were building a future, for themselves, for their son, for the family. They would continue to grow on this mountain where love had somehow taken root despite impossible odds. Inside the cabin, everything they owned could fit in a single wagon, if necessary. But in the ways that truly mattered, they were wealthy beyond measure, rich in love, in trust, in the kind of happiness that came from earning every moment of peace through hard work and fierce determination. Gideon shifted Samuel to his other arm and wrapped Mei Lin fully in his embrace, all three of them standing together as the last light faded from the sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new moments of both joy and difficulty. But they would face it together, the way they'd faced everything since that November day when a beautiful Chinese woman had stepped off a stage to meet a scarred mountain man, and two lonely souls had found their way home. Above them, the first stars began appearing in the darkening sky, ancient lights that had watched over these mountains for millennia. They would continue watching as Samuel grew strong on this wild land, as Gideon and Mei Lin built the life they'd fought so hard to protect, as their love, forged in necessity and strengthened through adversity, proved itself unbreakable. The mountain wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of sage and snow, and somewhere in that eternal sound was the promise that had drawn them both here, that in the wildest places, the strongest bonds could form, that honesty and courage could build something beautiful from the roughest materials, that love, when it was real and hard-earned and fought for with everything you had, could withstand anything the world threw at it. They stood there until full dark descended, three souls bound together by choice and circumstance, and the fierce determination to build something worthy of the struggles that had brought them to this moment. Then, as the cold began to bite and Samuel started to fuss for his evening feeding, they turned and walked back into their cabin, into warmth and firelight, and the continuing story of their lives together on the mountain they'd claimed as home. The door closed behind them with a solid sound of security and belonging, shutting out the vast wilderness and sealing in the love they'd built against all odds. And in that moment, surrounded by everything that mattered, Mei Lin and Gideon Hale knew with absolute certainty that they had won more than freedom from persecution. They had won the greatest victory of all, the right to love freely, to build a family honestly, and to live on their own terms in the beautiful, brutal wilderness they'd both come to call home.